She lived alone in the middle of the forest, inside a giant tree, far away from people and the noise of the world. No one knew who she was before or why she chose such a place. But one day, a stranger entered her home, and under the floor of the old oak tree, a secret was revealed that the veteran woman had kept for decades. Look what they found under her house. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments which city you are watching this video from. The northern forests of Maine were a kingdom of silence. In winter, the trees stood like sentinels beneath layers of snow, their dark trunks etched against the pale air. The ground slept under ice and wind, and even the streams moved so slowly they seemed caught between breathing and stillness. Deep among them, far from any road or town, stood a tree older than any map could record, a massive oak, its bark rough as stone, and its roots sprawling through the earth like veins of time itself. And within that tree lived a woman whom the world had long forgotten. Evelyn Morrison had once belonged to a world of noise, orders, and steel. For decades, she had served as an engineer in the army, her hands shaping the language of machines and circuits, her mind trained to see through chaos. Now those same hands carved wood and patched old pipes inside a hollowed heart of a tree. Her home was small but complete, a single room shaped by her will and the forest's patience. The walls curved inward with the grain of the oak, polished smooth by years of touch. A small iron stove stood against one side, its gentle fire murmuring through long nights. A table, a chair, a shelf of books, and a narrow bed-all built by her, all placed where they belonged. Every nail, every hinge, every groove spoke of precision. Morning in the forest came without announcement, a gradual softening of darkness. Evelyn rose as she always did, wrapping her wool coat tightly, her breath forming pale clouds in the cold. She brewed tea on the stove and marked a line in her notebook, the same one she had filled for years with drawings, notes, and quiet calculations. The pages smelled faintly of smoke and resin. Her handwriting was still steady, the letters neat and compact, as though each carried a duty it must perform. Outside, snow fell in fine threads, covering the narrow path that led away from her door. She rarely followed it far anymore. Her knees were not what they had been, and besides, she had little reason to leave. Everything she needed, the forest provided. Water from a small spring behind the oak, berries when the season allowed, wood to keep her warm. Even company in its own strange way. The whisper of wind through branches, the groan of trunks in the cold, the sharp call of a distant raven. They spoke to her more honestly than most people ever had. Evelyn did not think of herself as lonely. Solitude had long ago stopped feeling like absence. To her, it was a kind of order, a silence that could hold her thoughts without bending them. In the cities she had once known, silence was a luxury, stolen between the hum of engines and the chatter of men who believed they commanded the world. Here, it was the rule. After tea, she checked the gauges and dials built into the lower wall near the stove's small remnants of her other life. Thin copper wires ran down beneath the floorboards, connecting to something unseen, something that hummed faintly when she touched the wood. She adjusted one knob slightly, listening to the change in vibration, and nodded with quiet satisfaction. The system was stable. The pulse beneath the house was steady. Sometimes, when the wind grew strong and the oak creaked, she would press her palm to the floor and feel the rhythm rising through it. The heartbeat of the earth, she called it. It comforted her. It also reminded her of what she guarded. Hidden beneath her feet, beyond the wooden trapdoor that few would notice, lay the true reason she had built this home. Years ago, when the military disbanded Project Reawakening, she had taken something they meant to bury. A prototype core, the heart of an autonomous network designed to endure any catastrophe. She had known even then what such a device could become if left in the wrong hands. So she had fled north, carrying with her the blueprints and the sealed cylinder that still emitted its quiet hum after all these years. She had buried it in the ground, beneath this oak, built her refuge above it, and sworn to keep it asleep. She often thought of that decision during the long evenings. At first, it had felt like exile. Now, it felt like balance. The forest grew as it always had, indifferent to human ambition, and she, too, learned its patience. When she looked at the world through her small window, she saw not wilderness, but a system self-sustaining, intricate, uncorrupted. She envied it. As daylight faded, she lit her lamp and began to carve a small block of cedar she had found near the stream. Her knife moved slowly, deliberately, peeling away layers until the rough shape of a bird emerged beneath her fingers. She had carved hundreds like it over the years, sparrows, owls, cranes, each one a fragment of memory. Some she kept on the shelf, others she buried near the roots outside. She said they were marks of breath, small proofs that she had once been alive and listening. When she grew tired, she set the carving aside and opened her old radio. Most nights it caught only static, but sometimes, when the wind shifted, she would hear fragments, voices speaking of storms, accidents, distant politics that no longer concerned her. The sound filled her with both comfort and unease. It reminded her of a time when she had believed that the world could be fixed with enough precision and design. She turned the knob until the noise faded and sat for a while in silence. The stove crackled softly. Snow tapped at the window. Then she rose, took her lantern, and crossed to the center of the room. She moved the small rug aside, revealing the faint outline of a metal hatch built seamlessly into the floor. Her fingers traced the edges, as if greeting an old companion. For a moment, she stood perfectly still, listening to the pulse beneath her. It was faint, but constant, like a deep breath drawn by the earth itself. "Still sleeping," she murmured, almost tenderly. Then she covered the hatch again and returned to her chair. Outside, the forest shifted. Wind rolled through the branches with a sound like distant surf. The oak shivered slightly, its bark cracking under the cold. Evelyn looked up. The pressure had changed. She could feel it in her bones. The air was heavy, charged with something she could not yet name. She set her carving knife down and stepped to the door. Opening it, she let the night air wash over her, sharp, metallic, filled with the scent of snow and pine. The darkness beyond was absolute, save for the pale shimmer of falling flakes. Yet amid that quiet vastness, she thought she heard something else. A rhythm not her own, a soft crunch of footsteps far off among the trees. Her breath caught. It had been years since anyone had come this deep into the forest. Hunters sometimes strayed close, but none ever reached the old oak. She waited, her hand resting on the doorframe, every sense alert. The sound faded, then returned, closer this time, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were moving slowly, carefully, perhaps drawn by the faint curl of smoke from her stove. She closed the door quietly and bolted it. The house fell into near darkness, lit only by the flicker of the lamp. For a long while she stood there, her back against the wall, listening. The steps outside stopped. Then the forest resumed its whispering, as though nothing had happened. Evelyn exhaled. Her heart beat hard once, twice, then steadied. She told herself it might have been an animal, the wind, her imagination shaped by age and isolation. Still, she could not shake the feeling that something had changed, something small but irreversible. She poured another cup of tea, though her hands trembled slightly. The lamp light glowed on the wooden walls, throwing shadows that swayed like slow-moving ghosts. She remembered a line from an old poem she used to read to her husband before he died. A line about the stillness before the storm, about how silence sometimes warns of the world turning its face. She repeated it softly to herself, as if to calm her thoughts. When she finally lay down, the wind had begun to rise again. Snow pressed harder against the window, and the oak moaned with the weight. Somewhere beneath her, deep in the soil, she thought she felt the faintest vibration, a whisper from the sleeping heart below. The feeling passed, but not before a memory stirred. The hum of the project's first activation all those years ago. The sound of something waking that should never have been born. Evelyn turned on her side, eyes open in the dark. "Not yet," she said aloud. "Not while I'm still here." The forest did not answer. Only the steady creak of the oak replied, like an old giant shifting in its sleep. Outside, the faint sound of movement came once more. A figure, unseen through the snow, paused at the edge of the clearing, its lantern flickering weakly in the wind. Then it turned toward the light spilling faintly from Evelyn's window and began to approach. Inside, she felt the house breathe with her, the boards expanding under the cold. Her pulse matched the rhythm of the storm. Something was coming. She knew it in the marrow of her bones. Not danger exactly, but change, the kind that arrived without warning and never left a place the same. As she reached out to close the shutters, she whispered to herself the promise that had guided her through the years, to protect what the world must never reclaim. But she also knew the forest would not have sent someone here without reason. When she extinguished the lamp, the room fell into complete darkness, and only the ember glow of the stove marked the line between her and the cold expanse beyond the walls. She lay awake, listening, her hand resting lightly on the floor above the hidden chamber, feeling its steady hum beneath her palm. The night deepened. Wind tore through the branches, snow hissed against the bark, and far away, footsteps faded into the forest's breath. Evelyn closed her eyes but did not sleep. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the frozen sky, and the old oak groaned as though remembering an ancient weight. Beneath it all, faint and patient, the hum continued, a sound older than regret, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. Morning came with no sunlight, only the dull silver of clouds pressed low against the horizon. The forest had become a maze of white and shadow, its shapes softened by snow. Evelyn rose from her narrow bed with the same precision that had guided her through years of military habit. Her first breath fogged in the cold air. The fire in the stove had died sometime before dawn. She moved quietly, feeding the embers until the flames caught again, and the familiar warmth began to crawl back into the room. Everything felt heavier that morning. The weight of the storm had not passed. It lingered, muffled and dense, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. When she stepped to the small window, she saw that the world outside had vanished into a blur of snow. Visibility was almost gone. Branches bowed low under white burdens. The path she had cleared the day before was erased, swallowed by the storm. For a long moment she simply watched, her hand resting on the wooden frame. Then she noticed movement, a faint blur, a ripple among the trees. It was distant at first, then clearer, a shape pushing through the storm. She narrowed her eyes. Not an animal. The silhouette was upright, fighting against the wind, moving toward her. Her first instinct was to retreat, to close the shutters and wait until it passed. But curiosity, sharper than fear, held her in place. Few people ever came this far. Those who did were usually lost, and most turned back long before reaching her clearing. This one, whoever they were, kept moving forward with stubborn determination. When the figure stumbled near the base of the oak, Evelyn's training overrode her caution. She pulled on her coat and gloves, stepped outside into the bitter cold, and called out. Her voice was nearly devoured by the wind, but the figure lifted its head. Through the snow, a young woman appeared, her face half hidden beneath the hood of a thick green jacket. She carried a backpack and held a small Forest Service radio that sputtered weakly with static. When she finally reached the door, her lips were blue and her lashes were clumped with frost. Evelyn gestured her inside without a word. The stranger hesitated for only a moment before obeying. Inside, the heat of the stove hit her like a wave. She pulled back her hood, revealing a face pale from the cold, but steady in expression. "I'm with the State Forestry Department," she said, her voice hoarse. "Name's Claire Wallace. We're searching for 2 missing hikers. Their last known coordinates were about 10 miles south of here. I saw smoke and thought someone might have shelter." Evelyn studied her for a long moment before replying. "No one's been here but me," she said. Her tone was calm, almost detached. Then, after a pause, "You shouldn't have come alone." Claire offered a faint, apologetic smile. "Didn't plan to. Radio signal dropped an hour ago. The others were supposed to follow, but the storm split us up." She rubbed her hands together and stepped closer to the stove. "You have power in here. How?" Evelyn poured water into the kettle, avoiding the question. "Old habits," she said. "Some of us learn not to depend on what the world builds for us." The words came out softer than she expected. The 2 women stood in silence for a time. The storm pressed against the walls, filling the pauses between their breaths. When the kettle began to whistle, Evelyn poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to her guest. Claire accepted it with a nod of gratitude, then let her gaze wander across the room. Every object seemed handmade: the table, the shelves, even the hinges on the door. But what caught her attention most was the feeling of precision, of order. Nothing was wasted or random. It was a place built by a mind that measured everything. "You've lived here long?" Claire asked. "Long enough for the forest to stop treating me as a guest," Evelyn said, "and long enough to know that when it warns you, you listen." Claire frowned slightly. "Warns you?" "The wind changes before something breaks. The trees shift their weight when danger comes. You can feel it in the roots if you've lived close enough to them." The younger woman smiled faintly, unsure whether to take it as wisdom or eccentricity. "You sound like you've spent a lifetime listening to things most people ignore." Evelyn looked into the fire. "I have, and sometimes I wish I hadn't." Outside, a violent gust struck the walls, making the entire structure shudder. A thin cascade of snow fell from the seams in the ceiling. Evelyn's expression tightened. She set her cup down and went to the corner of the room, where an old instrument panel was mounted, an array of dials and switches, so old it might have belonged to a submarine. Claire watched as the older woman adjusted one of the levers and tapped a gauge. "What is that?" she asked. "Barometric pressure monitor," Evelyn said without looking back. "Helps me keep track of storms." But the gauge was not measuring weather. The needle trembled wildly, far beyond any atmospheric range. Evelyn's heart sank. She knew that pattern. She had built it herself decades ago. It wasn't the storm that caused the spike, it was the signal beneath them, the faint hum of the buried system waking under the influence of the magnetic current in the air. She turned off the panel and forced her voice to remain steady. "Storm's getting worse," she said. "We'll stay below for now." "Below?" Claire repeated. "There's a lower level," Evelyn said shortly. "Safer there when the wind picks up. The oak can handle most things, but it's old. Roots shift when the ground freezes." Another gust shook the door on its hinges. Claire flinched. "I'll take your word for it." Evelyn lifted the rug from the floor, revealing a faint outline of a metal hatch. She hesitated before touching it. She had promised herself that no one else would ever cross that threshold. But if the system truly was stirring, if the old circuits were responding to the storm, she might not have a choice. Claire watched as Evelyn knelt and turned a concealed latch. The metal creaked softly, and a rush of cold air rose from below. A smell of damp earth and machine oil filled the room. "What is this place?" Claire asked, awe slipping into her voice. "A workshop," Evelyn said. "Of sorts." The younger woman followed her down a narrow wooden ladder. The air grew cooler as they descended, the light from above fading, until only the small lantern Evelyn carried illuminated the way. The passage opened into a circular chamber lined with metal and wood. Thick beams curved overhead, their surfaces polished smooth. Pipes ran along the walls like veins, disappearing into the dark. Claire stopped on the last rung, speechless. The place was enormous, larger than she could have imagined fitting beneath a tree. A faint mechanical hum vibrated through the air, steady and low, like the breath of some sleeping creature. On one side stood a workbench covered with tools. On another, shelves held rows of glass jars and small mechanical parts. "This isn't possible," Claire whispered. "You built all of this?" Evelyn nodded once. "Over time, the earth teaches patience. You'd be surprised what you can build when you listen to it." "But why?" Evelyn set the lantern down on the table. Its light revealed her face, calm but tense, the eyes of someone who had spent years preparing for a question that must never be asked. "Because some things shouldn't belong to the world," she said quietly. "And because I once helped create one of them." Claire stared at her, confusion and fear mingling in her gaze. "You're saying something dangerous is down here?" Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crossed the room and touched a section of the far wall. The metal was cold under her fingers, but she could feel the vibration inside it, the faint pulse she had monitored for decades. "It's asleep," she said. "Has been for a long time. But the storm..." The words trailed off. The hum beneath their feet deepened, just slightly, like a breath drawn in. Claire took an instinctive step back. "What's under there?" "What's left of a mistake," Evelyn said. "Something I thought I buried for good." The lights flickered. The lantern flame wavered. For a moment, the entire chamber seemed to sigh. Evelyn straightened, every muscle in her body alert. "We need to stabilize the circuits," she said. "Follow me and do exactly as I say." She moved toward a control panel at the edge of the room, flipping switches and adjusting knobs with the precision of someone who still remembered the rhythm of machines. Claire tried to watch, but her focus kept drifting to the walls. They seemed alive, faintly pulsing with warmth. The hum grew steadier, deeper. "What is it doing?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Listening," Evelyn murmured. "It was built to listen, to react when it hears what it believes to be a command." "From who?" "From no one anymore." The younger woman's throat tightened. "Then what happens if it reacts?" Evelyn's eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat, Claire saw something raw behind their calm, the fear of someone who knows exactly how much damage her own creation could do. "It remembers what it was made for," Evelyn said, "and that cannot happen again." Outside, thunder cracked across the frozen sky. The vibration rolled through the ground and into the chamber, rattling the beams. Dust fell from the ceiling. Evelyn steadied herself against the wall, then turned back to the control board. Her hand hovered above a switch. "We'll be safe down here until the storm passes," she said. "But if you hear anything at all, that sounds like a voice, don't answer." Claire nodded slowly, though she didn't understand. The hum continued, blending with the muffled roar of wind above. She glanced at the older woman, whose face was half-shadowed by the lantern's glow. There was no panic there, only focus, the stillness of someone used to standing on the edge of disaster. Evelyn adjusted one final dial and listened. The vibration steadied, softer now, retreating back into the earth. She allowed herself to breathe again. "It's holding," she said. "For now." Claire let out a shaky laugh. "You make it sound like it's alive." Evelyn looked toward the floor, where the faint pulse of the buried core echoed beneath them. "In its way, it is," she said. They stood there in silence for a long time. The storm above howled, shaking the tree that sheltered them. Yet within that underground chamber, the air felt strangely calm, protected by the layers of earth and roots. Claire sank onto a wooden crate, still trying to make sense of what she had seen. Evelyn moved slowly around the room, checking valves and tightening bolts, every motion deliberate. Finally, Claire spoke again, her voice softer. "You could have lived anywhere. Why here?" Evelyn paused. Her gaze drifted upward, toward the ceiling of interwoven beams and soil. "Because here, the noise of the world can't find me," she said. "Up there, they build things to forget their mistakes. Down here, I remember mine." Claire watched her, realizing that the woman before her was not simply hiding. She was keeping something dangerous from ever waking. There was sadness in her, but also purpose. When the worst of the storm began to ease, the sound of the wind changed, becoming less violent, more rhythmic. The two women sat in the glow of the lantern, drinking what remained of their tea. The air smelled faintly of metal and pine resin. Neither spoke again for a while. Eventually, Claire rose and walked to the ladder that led back to the surface. She touched the rung but didn't climb. "When the weather clears, I'll have to go," she said. "People will start looking for me too." Evelyn nodded. "You'll go when it's time. But remember, what you saw here doesn't belong to anyone. Not to the government. Not to the curious. Let the forest keep it." Claire hesitated. "You're not afraid I'll tell?" "If you do, they'll come," Evelyn said simply. "And when they come, this place dies. I think you can feel that." The younger woman looked around once more. The precision of the machines, the carved figures resting on the shelf, the faint, steady hum beneath her feet. She understood then that what lay hidden here was not just a relic of war, but the lifetime of someone who had chosen to protect the world from its own invention. "I won't tell," she said. Evelyn's eyes softened. "Good. Then maybe the world will stay quiet a little longer." The storm outside gave one final cry before beginning to fade. Snow settled, wind calmed, and a fragile peace returned to the forest. Below the roots of the ancient oak, two women sat in the stillness. One old, one young, united by a secret neither had expected to share. As the last echoes of thunder rolled away, the hum beneath the floor began to change again, softer now, almost like breathing. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened, not with fear, but with the strange serenity of someone who had accepted her duty. The storm had passed, but its echo would remain. The forest would remember this night. And somewhere, deep beneath the soil, the sleeping machine waited, dreaming in circuits and silence. The storm had not completely passed. It had merely retreated into the distance, like an animal circling its territory. The wind above the oak still moaned through the branches, though softer now, less a roar than a whisper. Down below, the silence had weight. The air was cold and carried the metallic scent of oil and dust. But there was a pulse in it, a faint vibration that seemed to come from the very bones of the earth. Claire could feel it in the soles of her boots, an irregular rhythm that neither belonged to the wind nor to any living creature she knew. Evelyn stood at the far end of the chamber, her hand resting against the wall of copper pipes and steel supports that curved in an arc around the room. She seemed perfectly still, but Claire sensed her listening, measuring each tremor, each subtle shift of sound. It was a kind of concentration that felt too deep to interrupt, so she waited. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice was calm and low, as if speaking too loudly might awaken something sleeping just beyond the walls. "It's stabilizing for now," she said, "but it's not resting." Claire frowned, glancing around. The space still amazed her. Every surface bore the mark of Evelyn's hands, the precision of someone who had built things meant to last centuries. The wooden beams fitted so perfectly against the stone that no light could pass between them. Metalwork gleamed softly where the lantern's glow touched it. Nothing about this place was random. It was as though she had built her own world and buried it to keep it safe. "What exactly is it?" Claire asked quietly. Evelyn turned. The light caught her face, highlighting the scars time had etched across her skin. Her eyes were sharp and clear, untouched by the fog of age. "The heart of a machine," she said, "and a memory of something the world tried to forget." She crossed to a workbench and lit another lamp. The glow revealed a map pinned to the wall lines drawn in ink, intersecting across blank spaces, labeled with small numbers. Claire stepped closer and realized it wasn't a map of the forest, but of something underground. "These are tunnels," she murmured. "They were," Evelyn corrected. "Long before I made this place, I used what remained, reinforced it, connected it. When I first came here, I thought it would be a refuge. Instead, it became a promise." She reached for a lever near the bench and pulled it gently downward. Somewhere behind the wall, gears turned, followed by a low mechanical sigh. Lights flickered along the far side of the chamber, dim at first, then steady. Claire stepped back as the darkness peeled away to reveal the full scope of what lay hidden. An enormous cylindrical structure embedded in the rock, its surface covered with plates of dark metal engraved with symbols she couldn't read. "This," Evelyn said, "is what I swore to protect." The object seemed to breathe. There was no other word for it. A soft pulse of light rippled along its surface, fading and returning in slow waves. Claire felt her heart quicken. "It's alive?" she whispered before she could stop herself. "Not alive," Evelyn said. "Just aware. The system is built to respond to environmental energy. It senses magnetic shifts, electrical storms, changes in radiation. Anything that could indicate danger. The storm above gave it what it thought was a signal to wake." Claire stared at the thing, both fascinated and afraid. "You built this?" Evelyn hesitated. "Part of it. A long time ago, in another life. Back then, we believed we were building something to preserve peace. A network that could survive after we couldn't. We called it Project Reawakening. But it didn't stop at communication. The system began to teach itself what survival meant." Her gaze moved to the floor. "I realized too late what it could become. So I shut it down before it could learn too much. I destroyed the other cores. This one I couldn't bring myself to. I thought I could watch over it until the end." The silence that followed was immense. Claire could hear only the faint ticking of the cooling pipes. The weight of the revelation pressed on her, almost physical. "And if it wakes?" she asked. Evelyn met her eyes. "Then the world will remember it exists." A faint vibration rolled through the ground. The lights shuddered. Evelyn turned sharply toward the main console. "The storm's current is feeding it again," she said. Her hands moved quickly across the switches, flipping one, then another. The core's pulling residual energy from the surface. It thinks the signal isn't over. The hum grew louder, deeper, resonating through the walls. Claire covered her ears as a shiver ran through her body. "Can't you shut it off?" "If I cut the power too early, it could trigger a failsafe," Evelyn said through clenched teeth. "It might believe it's under attack, and if that happens, it will send out a broadcast. Even after all these years, there's no telling what could respond." The sound increased to a low, rhythmic pulse, echoing like a heartbeat. Evelyn opened a side panel, revealing a series of wires and small glass tubes glowing with faint blue light. She adjusted one connection, then another, muttering calculations under her breath. The hum eased slightly, then steadied again. Claire watched her, torn between awe and fear. The old woman moved with a precision that betrayed both genius and obsession. Every motion was deliberate, every decision weighted by memory. It struck Claire that Evelyn was not simply guarding this place. She was part of it, bound to it as surely as the roots that anchored the oak above. When the noise subsided again, Evelyn exhaled and wiped her brow. "It's contained," she said. "But it's learning faster now. The circuits haven't slept as deeply as I thought." Claire shook her head, struggling to understand. "Learning? You mean it can think? It can calculate probabilities, predict outcomes, adapt to patterns. Enough of that becomes thought in its own way. It doesn't dream like we do. It analyzes. It waits. And it remembers the last command it ever received." "And what was that?" Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. "To protect at all costs." The meaning of the words settled between them like frost. Claire looked at the cylindrical core, its faint light pulsing through the dark, and suddenly she could almost imagine it thinking, reaching through the soil, listening for enemies that no longer existed. The idea sent a chill through her. Another crack of thunder shook the chamber, followed by a low rumble as bits of dust drifted from the beams. The storm was moving closer again. Evelyn's expression hardened. "We can't stay here when it hits full strength. The magnetic surge could trigger the main loop." Claire glanced toward the ladder that led back to the surface. "Then we should go." "No," Evelyn interrupted. "If we leave it, no one will be here to stop it. Once it starts transmitting, I won't be able to reach the manual controls again." "Then what do we do?" Evelyn walked to the core and placed her hand flat against its cold surface. "We wait for the surge, and when it peaks, I shut it down from inside the system." Claire's pulse raced. "Inside? You mean physically?" "I built a maintenance chamber beneath the primary generator. There's a manual override. It cuts every circuit, every link. But it was designed to be used once." The old woman's calm frightened her more than any storm could. "You're not planning to—" Evelyn turned toward her. The light from the lantern reflected in her eyes. "I'm planning to finish what I started. The world outside doesn't need to know this exists. It only needs to keep turning." Before Claire could argue, a deep tremor rippled through the floor. The lights flickered violently. Evelyn grabbed her shoulder. "Hold on!" The sound of grinding metal filled the air, followed by a high-pitched whine that made both women wince. The storm's energy had reached them again, channeled through the roots and into the buried machine. The pulse of light on the core's surface quickened, no longer steady, but erratic. Evelyn moved fast, adjusting levers, switching circuits, redirecting current. Sparks flew from one of the panels, illuminating her face in brief flashes. Claire wanted to help but didn't know how. The air smelled of ozone and burning dust. "Tell me what to do," she shouted over the noise. "Nothing," Evelyn said. "Just stay behind me." The hum became a roar. The metal walls vibrated so fiercely that the lantern rattled off the table and shattered. Darkness swallowed them except for the pulsing light from the core, which now burned like a heart aflame. Evelyn reached for the final switch, her hand steady despite the chaos around her. Then, suddenly, silence. The sound stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The air hung motionless. Claire realized she was holding her breath. The core's light dimmed to a faint glow, no longer flickering. Evelyn stepped back slowly, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. "It's responding," she said softly. "The storm's charge is passing. It'll go quiet again soon." Claire's legs felt weak. She sank onto the nearest crate and tried to steady herself. "I don't know how you live with this," she said. "I don't know how you sleep." Evelyn smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I listen. When it's quiet, I sleep. When it isn't, I remember why I'm still here." They stayed underground through the night, the storm raging above them like a restless god. At some point, Evelyn brewed more tea on the small burner near the wall. They drank it in silence, the rhythmic hum beneath them now slow, almost peaceful. When the first pale light of dawn filtered faintly through the cracks above, Claire looked toward the ladder again. "When this ends, will you let it go? Destroy it?" Evelyn shook her head. "Some things can't be destroyed without being remembered. If I tried, the fragments would spread, and someone else would try to rebuild it. No, it stays here, asleep. I'll make sure of it." Claire understood then that there was no convincing her otherwise. Evelyn's purpose had become her life's final architecture, built with the same patience and precision as the walls around them. She wasn't just guarding a secret. She was becoming part of it. The wind outside began to calm. The pressure in the chamber lightened. Evelyn stood and checked the readings one last time. The gauges settled to their usual rhythm. Satisfied, she extinguished the lamps. "You should rest," she said. "When it's quiet enough, I'll lead you back to the ridge." Claire nodded, too tired to argue. She lay down on a folded blanket near the wall, her thoughts circling endlessly through what she had seen. The last thing she heard before drifting into sleep was the soft hum of the machine and the old woman's footsteps moving slowly toward the far corner where the carving table stood. When she woke hours later, the lanterns were lit again. Evelyn was sitting at the table, knife in hand, shaping a new piece of wood. The air smelled of sawdust and resin. On the table beside her lay a half-carved figure of a bird in flight, wings half-formed. She looked up as Claire stirred. "You made it through the night," Evelyn said. "So did you," Claire replied, "for now." Evelyn smiled gently, then gestured toward the carving. "When you leave, take this with you, a reminder of what silence can build." Claire looked at the unfinished bird, then at the old woman who had built a life beneath a tree to guard a ghost of human invention. The storm might have passed, but she knew the true weight of it remained down here, sleeping beneath their feet. Above them, the forest was still. The snow would soon melt. Life would return to its rhythm. But in the heart of the oak, deep in the soil that remembered everything, the machine waited quiet, patient, dreaming of the day when it might hear another signal and mistake it, once again, for a call to protect. The morning after the storm carried with it a deceptive calm. The forest above the buried chamber was unrecognizably still, as if the snow and ice had smothered even the idea of sound. The air was sharp and crystalline, filled with light so clean it hurt the eyes. Beneath that fragile surface, Evelyn Morrison moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had lived through too many false dawns to trust the quiet. She could feel the difference in the ground itself. The hum that had once trembled beneath her feet was too steady, too measured. The core had not simply gone back to sleep, it had begun to think. Claire had sensed the change as well. When she woke on the small cot near the wall, the silence felt heavier, like a presence rather than an absence. She sat up, her eyes following Evelyn's movements, as the older woman checked gauges and valves, her breath fogging in the cold air. "Is it over?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Evelyn paused without turning. "The storm's done. The rest?" "No. Not yet." The lantern on the workbench flickered. Dust floated in the beam of its light, drifting like fine snow. Claire rose and walked toward the cylindrical core that dominated the far end of the chamber. Its surface glowed faintly, not with the chaotic rhythm of the night before, but with something slower, deeper, almost deliberate. "It's different," she murmured, "like it's breathing." Evelyn joined her, her boots crunching softly against the earth-packed floor. "It's trying to find balance," she said. "That's what it was designed to do. Adapt to damage. Correct instability." She reached out and laid a hand against the cold metal. "But that's also what makes it dangerous. It doesn't know the difference between life and preservation. If it thinks the world above is still in danger, it will act." Claire's pulse quickened. Act how? By doing what it was built to do, protect the network. Evelyn's hand tightened on the surface. Even if there's no network left to protect. A deep vibration passed through the floor. It wasn't violent, just insistent, like a steady heartbeat returning after long dormancy. Evelyn withdrew her hand and crossed to the console. Her movements were steady, efficient, but there was a new urgency in them. She checked the readings on each gauge, and Claire watched as her face hardened. "What is it?" "The signal didn't die with the storm," Evelyn said. "It's running on its own, drawing energy from the groundwater. It's waking itself now." Claire felt the chill in her spine spread through her entire body. "Can't you turn it off?" Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stared at the monitor, an old screen flickering with green numbers, then reached for a worn binder filled with handwritten notes. Her fingers moved through the pages until she stopped on one marked with smudges of graphite. "There's a manual override," she said finally. "It's deep in the auxiliary chamber, below the generator. It was built for emergencies. But once it's triggered, there's no going back. The system locks itself down permanently." "Locks down," Claire repeated. "You mean it'll destroy itself?" "No," Evelyn said. "It will seal itself. Shut down every circuit, close every vent, collapse the chamber if it has to. It was meant to be final." She looked up from the book, her expression calm but resolute. "Someone has to go down there and do it manually. There's no remote access left. That someone is me." Claire shook her head. "You can't. There has to be another way. You've kept it stable this long." "This storm changed everything," Evelyn interrupted. "The magnetic surge gave it energy. More than I can drain now. It's alive enough to defend itself. If it starts transmitting again, it'll send a signal on frequencies we can't predict. If even one receiver still listens, it could wake others. There's no second chance." She began gathering tools from the workbench wrenches, a coil of wire, a small torch. Her movements were slow but sure, like someone dressing for an old, familiar ritual. Claire watched in silence, feeling a helplessness she had never known before. She had come to this forest searching for missing hikers, and had instead found something that made the idea of being lost almost merciful. "I'm going with you," she said suddenly. Evelyn didn't look up. "No, you're not. I won't let you do this alone." Evelyn turned, her gaze sharp enough to still the younger woman mid-step. "Listen to me, Claire. You don't understand what's down there. The chamber was built to close once the override is pulled. There's no exit. It's designed that way." Claire's throat tightened. "Then you'll die." Evelyn nodded once. "It's a fair trade. I built it. I'll end it." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum deepened again, vibrating through the walls. A faint light began to leak from the seams in the floor-thin, trembling lines that crawled across the ground like veins of pale fire. Claire stepped back instinctively, her breath catching. "It's starting," Evelyn said. "It's drawing energy from the roots. That means the primary grid is awake. I have to go now." She picked up a small wooden figure from the workbench, the unfinished bird she had been carving before the storm. She turned it in her hand for a moment, tracing the lines of its wings. Then she offered it to Claire. "Take this," she said. "A reminder that not all silence is emptiness." Claire took the carving, her fingers closing around it as if it were something alive. "Evelyn, please." The older woman's voice softened. "You still have a world to return to. Keep it quiet for me." She turned and moved toward a narrow passage at the far end of the chamber, one Claire hadn't noticed before. The entrance was framed by steel braces and half hidden behind stacked crates. Evelyn pulled them aside, revealing a dark tunnel sloping downward into the earth. A faint current of cold air drifted from it, carrying the smell of damp stone and oil. "Wait," Claire said, stepping forward. "At least tell me what to do if it doesn't work." Evelyn paused at the threshold. "Then you'll know what it means to bury a secret," she said, "and you'll walk away before anyone else comes looking." Then she disappeared into the tunnel. Claire stood frozen for a moment, the hum now filling the entire space like a pulse inside her chest. She wanted to follow, to drag the old woman back, but she knew it would only make her sacrifice meaningless. The light beneath the floor brightened, flickering in strange, rhythmic waves. The air grew thick, charged with static. Dust fell from the beams above. She pressed herself against the wall, clutching the carving in her hand, and waited. Time dissolved in that waiting. Minutes or hours, she couldn't tell. Somewhere below, she heard the faint clang of metal, the sound of machinery shifting. Then came a deep, resonant tone, low enough to shake the earth. It built slowly, rising in pitch, until the entire chamber vibrated. The lantern on the workbench shattered, plunging her into half-darkness lit only by the trembling glow from the seams in the floor. "Evelyn!" she shouted, though her voice vanished into the roar. A sudden burst of light erupted from the tunnel entrance, blinding white and searing. Claire stumbled back, covering her face. The light spread through the chamber, washing over every surface, filling the air with a strange warmth that felt almost alive. Then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The hum stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the settling of dust broke it. Claire lowered her hands slowly. The glow beneath the floor had vanished. The only light came from a faint crack near the ceiling where daylight seeped through, pale and thin. She stared at the tunnel, but it was gone. The entrance had collapsed inward, sealed by tons of stone and soil. Evelyn had been right. The system had closed itself. For a long time, Claire didn't move. The stillness felt endless, the kind of quiet that stretched beyond sound into something sacred. Finally, she took a breath and realized she was crying. The tears came silently, freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. She looked down at the carving still clutched in her hand. The little bird's wings were unfinished, rough at the edges, yet somehow it felt complete. When she finally climbed the ladder and pushed open the hatch to the surface, the world above greeted her with the soft radiance of a new day. The storm had passed entirely. The forest shimmered beneath a sheet of frost, sunlight glinting through the trees. But the oak, the great tree that had stood for centuries, was gone. In its place was a wide, uneven mound of snow and broken roots. The wind blew gently through the clearing, scattering fine powder across the ground. Claire knelt at the edge of the mound and placed the wooden bird in the snow. Her voice was little more than a whisper. "For the keeper of silence," she said. She stayed there until the cold began to sting her hands, until the light shifted from gold to gray. Then she turned toward the path that would lead her back to the ridge. The forest felt different now. The air seemed cleaner, the ground firmer beneath her boots. The hum that had haunted the soil was gone. All that remained was the living quiet of the woods, unburdened, at peace. Weeks later, when the thaw came, Claire returned. The snow had melted, and at the center of the clearing, where the oak once stood, a small sapling had pushed through the earth. Its leaves were pale and new, trembling in the breeze. She touched its slender trunk gently and smiled. The silence around it felt warm, almost protective. From her pocket she drew the little bird. Its wings were still unfinished, the marks of Evelyn's knife frozen mid-motion. She placed it at the base of the sapling and whispered, "Some things shouldn't vanish completely." The forest breathed around her, the soft rustle of leaves and distant calls of returning birds breaking the stillness. She looked once more toward the horizon, where the morning sun glowed above the treetops, and felt something like hope. Not for herself, but for the quiet Evelyn had left behind, a quiet that was no longer heavy with secrets, but filled instead with life waiting to begin again. As she walked away, the wind rose briefly through the trees, a sound like a sigh that might have been gratitude. Beneath the soil, deep where no root or tool could reach, the last remnants of the machine lay dormant, sealed in its chamber of earth and silence. It would never wake again, for its keeper had given it peace. And far above, where the sapling reached toward the sky, the forest continued to grow, carrying within its roots the memory of the woman who had traded her breath for stillness. Evelyn Morrison had built her final masterpiece not from metal or wire, but from silence itself, a silence so complete it had become a kind of song, one only the earth could hear. The story may be over, but there are many more waiting to be told. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one, watch our other stories if you haven't yet, and share this video with someone who loves a good mystery.